The Arctic Papers: How the Greenland Deal Became the Biggest Financial Scam in History. What began as a triumphant announcement on the world stage has now unraveled into what investigators are calling one of the most audacious financial crimes ever linked to a sitting U.S. presidency. If you were watching the markets this week, you likely felt the shock. Some investors lost profits, others lost their life savings. The moment that triggered it all came in Davos, where the President of the United States publicly declared that America had secured exclusive sovereign rights to Greenland's vast mineral wealth. Within hours, markets reacted violently. Greenland Resources Corp. (GRC), a little-known penny stock, surged from $2 to $200 in just 48 hours. Billions poured in from retail investors, institutional funds, and pension portfolios across the political spectrum. Then, just as suddenly, it collapsed to zero. As of 6 a.m., Monday, January 26, 2026, the reason is now clear. The Arctic Papers leak. A massive data dump, now known as the Arctic Papers, has surfaced on the dark web. The leak was released by the activist collective The Glass House and contains more than 50,000 internal emails, encrypted signal messages, and bank transfer records linked to the inner circle of the Trump White House. The documents do not point to a diplomatic misunderstanding or a failed negotiation. They reveal a premeditated, mathematically engineered financial fraud. According to the leaked records, there was never a Greenland deal. The Danish government never agreed to sell mineral rights. Greenland's local parliament in Nuuk never approved any lease or treaty. The document repeatedly displayed at political rallies was not a binding agreement at all. Instead, it was a non-binding cultural exchange memorandum, deliberately mistranslated and falsely presented to the public as a property deed. Why the deception? The motive, investigators say, was liquidity. The Arctic Papers reveal a direct connection between the Greenland market frenzy and the Japanese bond market crash that occurred days earlier. Internal communications show senior administration insiders, along with a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, were facing catastrophic margin calls scheduled for the following Monday. They needed cash. They needed it immediately. They needed a bubble. So they created one. Emails show officials openly discussing how to manufacture a liquidity event, joking about selling ice to the Eskimos while coordinating media leaks and presidential statements designed to trigger a buying frenzy. The anatomy of the scheme. The operation worked because it was built on a kernel of truth. Greenland is valuable. The island holds vast reserves of rare earth elements, neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, materials essential to modern technology. Fighter jets, electric vehicles, smartphones, and advanced weapon systems all depend on them. China currently dominates nearly 90% of global supply, and U.S. defense planners have long sought alternatives. That legitimate strategic interest was weaponized. Timeline of deception. January 10th. Anonymous sources tell Fox Business that a historic Greenland agreement is imminent. GRC, a dormant company with no employees and an expired mining permit, jumps from $0.02 to $0.05. January 15th. The president tweets, "Greenland is coming home. Huge news soon. China is out." GRC hits $25. Retail investors flood in. January 18th through 20th. Administration insiders quietly sell their holdings through offshore entities. January 21st. Markets collapse. Trading halts. GRC is wiped out. Legal fallout begins. Federal agencies are now moving fast. According to sources familiar with the investigation, the SEC, Department of Justice, and the Southern District of New York are engaged in a race to file indictments against members of the president's inner circle. Prosecutors are reportedly treating the case not as political misconduct, but as organized financial fraud. Conclusion: the Greenland announcement was not statecraft. It was not diplomacy. It was a rug pull. The Arctic papers suggest this was the largest pump-and-dump scheme ever executed, one that used the authority of the presidency itself as the marketing engine. And the investors who believed it? They weren't participants. They were the mark.
Inside Project Iceberg: How the Greenland narrative was engineered to manipulate the markets. As the frenzy intensified, supporters branded the unfolding events Louisiana Purchase 2.0. Pro-Trump rallies erupted online, social media feeds burned with patriotic graphics, and financial forums buzzed with promises of a historic geopolitical victory. The timeline reveals how the operation reached its peak. January 20th, the binder moment. On the anniversary of the presidential inauguration, the White House press secretary stepped to the podium. In her hands was a thick, leather-bound document. She announced that the president had signed a framework for resource sovereignty. No text was released, no details were provided. The visual alone was enough. Within minutes, Greenland Resources Corp. (GRC) surged to $80 per share. January 22nd, Davos and the market explosion. 2 days later came the climax. Standing before world leaders at the World Economic Forum in Davos, the president declared, "We have total control." He went further, explicitly naming Greenland Resources Corp. As the primary partner in developing Greenland's mineral wealth. Legal experts say this was the critical violation, a sitting U.S. president publicly promoting a specific penny stock from an international podium. Markets went vertical. GRC skyrocketed to $200, briefly giving the empty shell company a market capitalization larger than Ford Motor Company. What was really in the binder? According to the Arctic Papers leak, the leather-bound document was not a treaty, not an agreement, and not a framework for sovereignty. It was a draft copy of a 2019 climate research study. What Denmark actually signed was far more mundane, a Memorandum of Understanding on Arctic Research and Education, authorizing limited student exchanges and a joint study on polar bears. There were no mining rights, no sovereignty transfer, no exclusion of China. The entire geopolitical narrative was fiction. Investigators now believe the fabrication was designed to last exactly 1 week, just long enough for insiders to exit their positions. Project Iceberg: The Evidence. Among the leaked files is a folder titled Project Iceberg, believed to be the internal codename for the operation. One email, dated January 5, 2026, was sent from a senior presidential advisor, identity redacted for platform compliance, to a hedge fund executive at Polaris Capital. Subject: the liquidity problem. We are underwater on the yen trade. The Japan thing is going to blow up next week. We need a bridge. How fast can we move the GRC vehicle? The response: the vehicle is ready. We control 85% of the float through offshore shells, but we need a catalyst. We need volume. Can the big guy drop the news before the Japan margin calls hit on Tuesday? Another email, dated January 12th, came from the White House Communications Director. Subject: the map text. The Danes are freaking out. They say they haven't agreed to anything. The Prime Minister is refusing to take the call. The reply from the advisor: it doesn't matter what they say. We just need the headline to stick for 72 hours. Run the map graphic with the US flag over nuke. Fox will pick it up. By the time the Danes issue a denial, we will be out. That sentence, "by the time they issue a denial, we will be out," is now being cited by investigators as direct evidence of intent to defraud. Coordinated market manipulation. The Arctic papers also include logs from Algorithm 45, an encrypted war room chat used by operatives tied to the executive branch. Participants discussed deploying bot farms to flood Reddit and X with hype. One user wrote, "Get the meme team on GRC. Tell them it's the crypto killer. Tell them it's backed by gold." Another replied, "Done. The boss is going to mention it in the Soto preview." Federal authorities now describe the operation as industrial-scale market manipulation coordinated from within the highest levels of government. What comes next? Prosecutors say the evidence points to a deliberate pump and dump scheme, using the authority of the presidency itself as the marketing engine. Indictments are expected, and what was sold to the public as historic statecraft is increasingly being described by investigators in a far simpler way: a financial trap, a fabricated narrative, and a week-long window to cash out.
Follow the money: how the Greenland hoax paid off and why it had to happen fast. The Arctic Papers leak did more than expose emails and chat logs. It followed the money. Alongside internal communications, the activist group The Glass House released blockchain transaction IDs, SWIFT wire records, and offshore registry files, allowing investigators and journalists to reconstruct exactly who profited from the Greenland market surge and where the money went. The Understanding Company. At the center of the scheme is Greenland Resources Corp., GRC. The company was incorporated in Delaware in 2024, listing its headquarters as a P.O. box in Cheyenne, Wyoming. On paper, its CEO was a man named Lars Jensen. Reporters located Jensen early Monday morning. He is not a mining executive. He is a ski instructor in Aspen, who previously worked as a caddy for a member of the Trump family. According to multiple sources reviewing the Arctic Papers, Jensen served as a straw executive, a public-facing placeholder with no control over the company. The hidden owners. The true ownership of GRC was concealed behind a network of offshore entities: Patriot Holdings Entity, LLC, Cayman Islands; Arctic Strategy Fund, Cyprus; Freedom Minerals, Ltd., Bermuda. The leaked documents decode this structure. Investigators say all three entities trace back to a single trust managed by the family office of a senior White House advisor. Most explosively, one funding channel appears to connect to a blind trust associated with the president himself, a claim now under urgent review by federal authorities. The cash out. According to the transaction records, the exit occurred on Thursday, January 22nd, the same day as the president's Davos speech. As GRC peaked at $200 per share, the three offshore entities sold a combined $4.2 billion worth of stock directly into the rally. The buyers included U.S. pension funds, institutional investors, retail traders, small individual investors drawn in by patriotic messaging and presidential endorsements. In effect, investigators say the insiders sold to the public at the exact top. Why $4 billion was needed? The timing was not coincidental. The Arctic Papers reveal that the same family office controlling GRC was heavily leveraged in the yen carry trade, a strategy that collapsed when the Bank of Japan raised interest rates earlier that week. On Monday, they received a margin call estimated at $3.5 billion. Failure to meet it would have meant insolvency. Instead, the documents suggest, the losses were covered using proceeds from the Greenland stock surge. In simple terms, investigators allege that money taken from American investors was used to settle debts with Japanese banks, preventing the collapse of a powerful financial network. Prosecutors are now examining whether this constitutes securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering tied to geopolitical misrepresentation. Denmark breaks its silence. While the financial allegations are complex, the diplomatic fallout is stark. On Monday morning, the Danish foreign minister delivered an unusually blunt press conference. Holding up the document the president had described as a deed, he identified it as a 3-page memorandum of understanding on weather data sharing. He said, "It does not mention mining. It does not mention sovereignty. It does not mention leasing or transfer of territory." He added that during negotiations, the U.S. did not send diplomats. They sent real estate lawyers. According to the minister, U.S. representatives placed a map on the table, pointed to the Thule Air Base and said, "We are expanding this to the coast. Sign here or we tariff your Lego exports." Denmark refused. The agreement was never signed. Davos, the walkout and the fallout. This disclosure sheds new light on last week's dramatic walkout by European leaders at Davos. Officials familiar with the situation say the leaders believed the Greenland claim was false and refused to participate in what they feared was a market manipulation spectacle. When the president later labeled European leaders vassals on social media, diplomats now interpret it as panic, not bravado, an attempt to intimidate them into silence before the trade settled. Regulatory action begins. The legal response has now started. At 9:30 a.m. Monday, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission halted trading in GRC, citing concerns over material misrepresentation and market manipulation. Multiple agencies, including the SEC, the Department of Justice, and the South District of New York, are now reviewing the Arctic papers as potential evidence. What was sold to the public as a historic geopolitical triumph is increasingly being described by investigators in far simpler terms: a fabricated deal, a coordinated dump, and a transfer of wealth engineered to save insiders from collapse.
Legal reckoning begins as Greenland stock is frozen and investigations accelerate. Trading in Greenland Resources Corp. GRC remains frozen at 42 cents after the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission formally announced an investigation into market manipulation and insider trading related to Arctic-linked securities. While the SEC is often criticized for moving slowly, enforcement officials acknowledge that this case is different. Much of the evidence, emails, transaction records, and public statements, is already in the open. At the center of the inquiry is Rule 10b-5, the cornerstone of U.S. securities law, which makes it illegal to knowingly make false statements or omissions that affect a stock's price. Investigators are examining a simple but consequential sequence. Public statements were made about Greenland's sovereignty. The stock price surged. Related trusts and entities sold large positions. If proven, securities lawyers say, the elements of a civil enforcement case are unusually clear. The Justice Department question. Criminal liability presents a more complex challenge. Under long-standing Office of Legal Counsel opinions, a sitting president cannot be indicted while in office. That protection, however, does not extend to advisors, family members, or corporate officers. According to sources familiar with the investigation, prosecutors are focusing on senior White House advisors, offshore fund managers, and the nominal CEO of GRC, the Aspen ski instructor identified as a straw executive. The Southern District of New York, SDNY, the federal office with jurisdiction over Wall Street crimes, is reportedly preparing subpoenas. Several legal analysts say investigators are expected to pressure lower-level participants to cooperate. If the front man talks, one former federal prosecutor said, the conspiracy trail leads straight to the Oval Office. Wire fraud exposure. Because the alleged scheme involved emails, international wire transfers, and cross-border financial transactions, prosecutors are also reviewing potential violations of federal wire fraud statutes. Each transmission could constitute a separate count. Legal experts caution that sentencing estimates are speculative, but note that wire fraud convictions can carry decades of cumulative prison exposure for those noted as organizers. Civil courts move faster. Even before criminal charges are filed, the civil consequences are mounting. By Monday morning, multiple law firms had begun organizing class action lawsuits on behalf of investors who lost money in GRC. These suits will seek discovery, emails, contracts, and internal communications, potentially exposing additional evidence. Veteran litigators say the civil process may move faster and prove more damaging than criminal proceedings. Civil discovery can break a case wide open, one securities attorney said. It forces the truth into daylight. A political turning point.
Unlike past controversies, analysts say this scandal strikes at the core of the president's political coalition. The alleged victims are not institutional elites. They are retail investors, many of them longtime supporters who bought GRC after it was promoted by pro-Trump media figures and online influencers. Social media platforms are now flooded with videos of self-described supporters describing severe losses. "I put my kid's college fund into GRC because I trusted him. It's gone," one investor said in a widely shared clip. Political strategists say this dynamic is uniquely dangerous for a populist movement. Scandals don't usually hurt him because his base believes the system targets him, one analyst said. This time, the allegation is that the system was turned against them. Recent demonstrations reflect the shift. Protesters are no longer chanting traditional political slogans. They are chanting refund. The crypto subplot. The Arctic Papers leak also reveals a parallel scheme involving a cryptocurrency called Arctic Coin, marketed as being backed by Greenland's mineral rights. According to blockchain records, Arctic Coin was minted by the same Bermuda-registered shell company tied to GRC. Approximately $500 million worth of tokens were sold before the price collapsed to zero. Wallet tracing shows the proceeds were routed into a super PAC supporting the 2026 midterm elections, a move campaign finance experts describe as potentially catastrophic. If fraud proceeds were laundered into political donations, that is a violation so severe it dwarfs most modern campaign scandals, a former FEC counsel said. Media fallout. This revelation may also explain the sudden shift in tone from traditionally friendly media outlets. Several analysts believe senior executives quickly recognized the legal exposure once financial records surfaced. As one former network executive put it, once the money trail is public, there's no narrative strong enough to protect it. What comes next? The SEC investigation is underway. Federal prosecutors are circling. Civil suits are forming. What remains unresolved is how far accountability will reach and how much damage will be done before the process is complete. For now, one fact is no longer in dispute. The Greenland story is no longer a political controversy. It is a full-scale legal crisis with financial, criminal, and electoral consequences unfolding simultaneously. Media breaks ranks as Greenland scandal shatters the business genius myth. As the Greenland Resources Corporation scandal unfolded, a decisive break occurred, not in politics, but in media. According to people familiar with internal deliberations, financial analysts inside Fox Corporation closely monitored the sudden surge in GRC trading volume. They recognized the warning signs immediately: abnormal liquidity, coordinated hype, and price action untethered from fundamentals. Executives reportedly concluded that continued promotion of the stock carried severe legal risk. If GRC collapsed after being amplified on air, Fox could face exposure for aiding and abetting securities fraud. Within hours, the network cut away. Then it went dark. Then it turned. Fox's decision was not ideological, analysts say. It was fiduciary. Protecting the company's balance sheet required distancing itself from the trade and from the man driving it. By sacrificing Trump, Fox saved itself. Now, the network is running coverage of the Arctic Papers leak around the clock, positioning itself as a reluctant truth-teller that tried to warn viewers before the collapse. The end of a carefully built myth. For decades, Donald Trump cultivated the image of a master deal-maker, a businessman whose instincts bent markets and governments alike. The Greenland episode, investigators argue, may permanently dismantle that narrative. There was no deal, there was no negotiation, there was only a fabrication designed to inflate a stock price. Legal experts are blunt, falsely presenting a non-binding research memorandum as a sovereign resource agreement is not capitalism, it is deception. This wasn't deal-making, one former SEC official said. It was theft dressed up as statecraft. A historical inflection point. Economists and historians are already drawing comparisons to infamous financial scandals, the South Sea Bubble, Enron, WorldCom. But many argue the Greenland affair is categorically different. Those scandals corrupted corporations. This one, they say, corrupted the presidency itself. Investigators allege that the authority of the State Department was repurposed as a marketing tool for a penny stock, reducing American diplomacy to what one analyst called a boiler room operation with flags. As markets closed Monday, trillions in paper wealth had vanished, but the deeper loss may be institutional. Trust, both domestic and international, has evaporated. How ownership was hidden. Understanding the structure. At the center of the Justice Department's inquiry is the ownership structure used to conceal control of GRC. According to the Arctic Papers, the scheme relied on a Russian doll LLC architecture. Company A, Wyoming, owned by Company B, Delaware, owned by Company C, Cayman Islands, owned by a trust registered in the Cook Islands. While the Cook Islands are known for strict secrecy laws, the leak includes beneficial ownership disclosure forms from a Cayman-based bank, required under international anti-money laundering rules. On the Patriot Holdings LLC form, investigators reportedly found something unexpected. The signature was not that of a lawyer or trustee. It was a familiar, stylized black marker signature. Prosecutors describe it as critical evidence, proof not only of benefit, but of direct control and knowledge. The automation of fraud. The leak also includes source code tied to the promotion of GRC. According to analysts reviewing the files, bot networks were programmed to scrape Greenland-related headlines, repost them with bullish hashtags, generate AI-written due diligence reports claiming massive mineral discoveries. These reports appeared on retail investor platforms such as Reddit and Seeking Alpha, creating the illusion of organic enthusiasm. Legal scholars say this crosses a new threshold: automated securities fraud at scale. The revelation raises uncomfortable questions for technology companies. Why were the campaigns not flagged? Why were accounts not suspended? And what responsibility do platforms bear when financial manipulation spreads through their systems? Regulators are now signaling a broader crackdown on social media-driven market abuse. Political silence speaks volumes. Notably absent from the defense effort are some of Trump's most vocal allies. Representative Jim Jordan has issued no statement. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has remained silent. Political strategists say the reason is obvious. You don't defend a Ponzi scheme, especially when your own voters were the ones who lost everything. A spell broken. Past scandals, Access Hollywood, January 6th, failed to sever Trump's bond with his base. This one may have succeeded where others could not, because this time the allegation is not moral failure or political extremism, it is financial betrayal. Supporters who trusted Trump's word say they invested their savings believing they were buying into American strength and instead became exit liquidity. The Greenland deal, one analyst said, was the perfect Trump scam, enormous, theatrical, and hollow. But it failed for one reason: it targeted the wrong people. It scammed the world, and it scammed its own believers. There is no bankruptcy court that can discharge that kind of debt.